Have you ever wondered why, if God is all-powerful, he doesn't destroy Satan once and for all? After all, Satan has caused so much suffering and evil throughout the centuries. Why does God still allow his existence? Is there a greater reason behind this? Something we can't see? In today's video, we'll explore this big question and other surprising biblical curiosities that will challenge the way you see good and evil, and even the nature of God. Stay until the end and discover the mysteries the Bible reveals about what is really happening between good and evil. If you want to receive more powerful messages like this, comment "I want it" and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. In the beginning, Satan was not the evil and cunning being we know today. He was created by God with a grand purpose: to serve as an angel of light, exalting and worshipping the Creator in a perfect heaven. Imagine the beauty of this creation, where light and purity reigned, and Satan was one of the most prominent figures in this celestial scene. According to the texts in Isaiah 14:12-15 and Ezekiel 28:12-15, he was a stunning being, perfectly shaped with exceptional beauty and wisdom. His duties were nobly divine, meant to bring worship and praise to God himself, reflecting his glory. However, something began to change within him. What started as pure dedication to his mission turned into something much darker. Pride began to take over his heart. Satan was not content with being a servant of God, and this was the trigger for his fall. He desired more, wanting something that was not meant for him, the throne and divine authority. He thought to himself, "I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will raise my throne, and I will be like the Most High." His pride blinded him to his true nature and the role he was meant to fulfill. Initially a being of light, he now became a being of darkness, unsatisfied with what God had given him. But what is even more interesting is realizing that this pride did not arise from a single moment, but from a process. Satan fed his ego, comparing himself to God and desiring the Creator's power. He wanted more than he was allowed, and this led him to rebel. The Bible tells us that he attempted to usurp God's power, which was, of course, impossible. According to the biblical texts, God's reaction was immediate and irrevocable. Satan and his followers were cast out of heaven. Heaven, the place of perfection, could no longer harbor a being so corrupted by his own pride. He fell, dragging with him a legion of angels who followed him in rebellion. This fall, known as Satan's fall, was a cataclysmic event, not only in the spiritual realm, but also in God's grand purpose. But a question arises: why did God allow this to happen? If God knew what would happen, why create Satan with the capacity for rebellion? This is where the great mystery of God's plan comes in. By allowing the creation of Satan and his fall, God offers us a stage for true freedom and choice. Satan's free will and the will of the angels who followed him reflect the freedom God grants to all created beings. In his infinite wisdom, God knew that for there to be true love, free will was necessary. If Satan had never had the freedom to choose, he would never have had the chance to show his true nature. Satan's act of rebellion was a choice he made, and this choice had consequences not only for him, but for the entire universe. Satan's story, then, is much more than the fall of a celestial being. It is the introduction of an essential theme for understanding the relationship between God and creation: freedom. Satan, in wanting to be equal to God, introduced the concept of rebellion and pride. But it was God who, by allowing this fall, gave us the privilege of choosing, of loving voluntarily and not by force. God, in his infinite love, created beings with the ability to choose to serve him or reject him, and this is essential for understanding Satan's role in the great divine plan. Satan's choice to rebel was not a failure of God, but a demonstration of the freedom God gives to all his created beings. And this freedom, as painful as it was, is a testimony to God's trust and love for his creation. But then, a deeper question arises. What will God do now, after Satan's fall? How does this event shape the future of the universe and the destiny of every human being? What is God's response to this rebellion? The answer lies in the development of the divine plan of salvation, something God, in his infinite wisdom and love, began to build from that moment. In the next topic, we will explore how God's plan was devised to restore what was lost and how Satan became humanity's greatest adversary, initiating a spiritual battle that still resonates today. Can you imagine what comes next when we see how God begins to redeem humanity? But before, did you know that every time like a video like this, you are helping to spread the Bible's teachings to more people? Subscribe to continue being part of this mission. Imagine for a moment that you were a leader, someone with the power to govern over everything that exists. Now imagine that you have a perfect creation, beings who inhabit a realm filled with beauty and harmony. But at some point, one of these beings decides to rebel, question your authority, and challenge your power. What would you do? The immediate answer for many would be clear: defeat this being right away. But when it comes to God and the story he created, what seems like the simplest solution is actually a much more complex and profound choice. The story of Satan's fall is undoubtedly one of the most enigmatic in the Bible. When he rebelled against God, many would expect God, with his absolute power, to simply destroy him. However, God chose not to do this. Why did he not do so? What can we learn from this about the divine plan and how God deals with evil? In his infinite wisdom, God allows Satan to still exist even after his rebellion, not because he is powerless, but because there is a greater purpose being fulfilled through his actions. The Bible teaches us that God did not create evil, but he allows evil to exist in order to reveal the true nature of humanity and in a mysterious way to glorify his name. When we think about it, it's not hard to see that one of the greatest gifts God gave to humans was free will, the ability to choose. But what does this have to do with Satan? The connection is deeper than it may seem at first. By allowing Satan to operate in the world, God places us before a fundamental choice: to choose good or to choose evil. We are not being forced down a path. On the contrary, we are challenged to decide by our own will. And it is through this choice, often difficult and painful, that the true character of a person is revealed. Imagine, for example, a teacher who prepares his students for a great challenge. He knows that if he simply solved all their problems, there would be no real learning, no growth. In the same way, God allows evil to exist because it is through the struggle against evil that a person is driven to seek goodness, truth, and justice. However, this does not mean that Satan has any kind of power outside of God's control. Evil is not beyond his supervision, and everything Satan does is in some way part of a greater plan that God has for the world. Satan does not act independently of God, as if he were an opposing and chaotic force that cannot be contained. In fact, even his actions are used by God to fulfill his divine purposes. The Bible teaches us that although Satan rebelled, he is not an uncontrollable agent beyond God's reach. Now, if we think about the Bible, we see that Satan tries to do evil, but God is able to redirect even the wicked actions to fulfill his perfect plan. This is evident, for example, in the story of Job, when Satan tries to harm Job, but God allows this to happen to test Job's faith and faithfulness. In the end, what seemed to be a blow from Satan against a righteous man becomes a display of God's power and human perseverance. This is a clear example of how evil, even in its most cruel manifestation, can be used to fulfill the divine purpose. But what does this have to do with us, humans today? How can we understand our role in this plan? The freedom that God gave us is not just a right, it is a responsibility. When God allowed Satan to rebel and remain active in the world, he not only put evil to the test, but he also gave us the opportunity to choose, to make a difference. Our choice, our stance toward evil defines us. And by facing this evil, whether internal or external, God gives us the chance to draw closer to him, to know his mercy and his justice. Now we can reflect. If the presence of evil challenges us to make decisions and affirm our faith, what can we do to choose good in a world that seems to be constantly crumbling under the forces of darkness? And more importantly, how does God use the struggle against evil to reveal the true nature of love and divine grace in our lives? Stay tuned, because in the next topic, we will explore how the presence of evil is not just an opportunity for choice, but also a way through which God reveals his character and his plan for each of us. If you believe that these teachings can transform lives, leave a like so that more people can discover this truth. The book of Job is undoubtedly one of the Bible's most profound and mysterious narratives, addressing issues that go to the heart of human existence: suffering, faithfulness, and the battle between good and evil. When we read the story of Job, many questions arise, and one is hard to ignore. Why did God allow Satan to test Job? What appears to be a simple challenge unfolds as a spiritual battleground where not just Job's material possessions or even his health are at stake, but his faith, character, and ultimately the very concept of faithfulness to God. And the most fascinating part of all is that this story doesn't end with the simple victory of one character over another, but with a profound transformation in the relationship between human beings and the Creator. The story begins with an awe-inspiring vision, a heavenly meeting where Satan, ever the challenger, presents himself before God. God, in his infinite wisdom and power, begins to praise Job's faithfulness, a righteous and upright man who finds in God his greatest source of trust and prosperity. Satan, however, sees things differently. He challenges God, claiming that Job's faithfulness isn't genuine. He argues that Job is only faithful because God has blessed him abundantly, and if those blessings were taken away, Job would surely renounce him. Satan challenges God, stating that Job's character has never truly been tested. And this is where the beginning of a cosmic battle takes place, transcending any human dimension. God then allows Satan to test Job, but with limitations. Job loses his possessions, his children, and his health. He is consumed by suffering, but the most remarkable thing is that, amid all of this, Job does not lose his faith in God. Although he questions, despairing at times, he never renounces his trust. This reaction of Job in the face of chaos leads us to a deep reflection. What would our reaction be if we were in his place? Are we prepared to endure the trials life imposes, keeping our faith unshaken even when everything seems to crumble? The book of Job reveals something surprising and profound about the struggle between good and evil. It is not merely a battle of cosmic and supernatural forces. The true battleground is the human heart. A person's faithfulness and character are tested not because of external circumstances, but by how we react to them. What is truly being challenged is not God's power, but the true nature of the human heart. What happens to Job is a reflection of the internal struggle we all face in our lives. The temptation to abandon faith when pain becomes unbearable, when evil seems to prevail, and when suffering appears endless. Now, you might ask, what does this teach us about our own spiritual journey? Well, Job's example is more than just a story of endurance in the face of adversity. It is a living lesson about the depth of trust in God, even when answers are not immediate and suffering seems unending. The truth is that suffering is not just a test of faith. It is also an opportunity for the soul to grow stronger and mature spiritually. Each moment of pain is a chance to declare, like Job, that our trust in God does not depend on favorable circumstances, but on a faith that stands firm even in the midst of the storm. Yet Job's test is not just about personal faith. The deeper and more crucial question the book of Job presents is, what really happens when evil enters the scene? Suffering is not evil in itself, but it often becomes a stage where human character is forged and revealed. In the moment of loss, suffering, and pain, the human heart has the opportunity to choose the path of faithfulness to God or the path of hopelessness. Job was not a hero for never questioning, but for remaining faithful even in the darkest moments. As we move forward in the story, we see the reactions of his friends, who attempt to explain Job's suffering based on a system of divine rewards and punishments. But what they fail to understand is that the battle between good and evil is not simply a trade-off of good and bad deeds. Job's suffering was not a punishment. It was a test of character. Job was not being punished, he was being purified. And this distinction is crucial for understanding the true purpose of human suffering. It is not just a test of obedience, but a process of purification and refining of the soul. And finally, the true surprise and lesson of the book of Job do not come just from the fact that he persevered in faith, but from the fact that in the end, he not only receives back what he had lost, but is also blessed with a deeper relationship with God. Job, who began his journey with strong faith but limited understanding of God, ends with a deeper knowledge and richer intimacy with the Creator. He receives not only his possessions back, but also a new understanding of God's greatness and sovereignty. The mystery of the book of Job, therefore, is much more than a simple battle between good and evil. It is a vivid representation of the struggle that happens within each of us, the struggle to keep our faith, our trust, and our character intact in the face of life's adversities. The true victory lies not in escaping suffering, but in overcoming it with a firmer heart and a deeper faith. Are you ready to understand more deeply how this struggle unfolds in your life? How can Job's faith be reflected in your own journey? In the next topic, we will explore the effects of the book of Job is undoubtedly one of the deepest and most mysterious narratives in the Bible, addressing issues that go to the heart of human existence: suffering, faithfulness, and the battle between good and evil. As we read the story of Job, many questions arise, and one of them is hard to ignore. Why did God allow Satan to test Job? What seems like a simple challenge unfolds as a spiritual battleground where not only Job's material possessions or health are at stake, but also his faith, character, and ultimately the very concept of faithfulness to God. And what's most fascinating is that this story does not end with a simple victory of one character over another, but with a profound transformation in the relationship between humanity and the Creator. The story begins with an impressive vision, a heavenly meeting where Satan, ever the challenger, presents himself before God. God, in his infinite wisdom and power, begins to praise Job's faithfulness, a righteous and upright man who trusts God as his greatest source of confidence and prosperity. However, Satan sees things differently. He provokes God, claiming that Job's faithfulness is not genuine. He argues that Job is only faithful because God has blessed him abundantly, and if these blessings were removed, Job would certainly renounce him. Satan challenges God, asserting that Job's character has never truly been tested, and here begins a cosmic battle that transcends any human dimension. God then allows Satan to test Job, but with limits. Job loses his possessions, his children, and his health. He is consumed by suffering, but what is most remarkable is that through it all, Job does not lose his faith in God. Although he questions and despairs, he never renounces his trust. This response from Job amidst chaos leads us to a deep reflection. What would our reaction be if we were in his place? Are we prepared to endure the trials that life imposes, keeping our faith unwavering, even when everything seems to fall apart? The book of Job reveals something surprising and profound about the struggle between good and evil. It is not just a battle of cosmic and supernatural forces. The real battlefield is the human heart. Human faithfulness and character are tested not because of external circumstances, but by how we react to them. What is truly being challenged is not the power of God, but the true nature of the human heart. What happens to Job is a reflection of the internal struggle we all face in our lives. The temptation to abandon faith when pain becomes unbearable, when evil seems to prevail, and when suffering seems endless. Now you may ask, what does this teach us about our own spiritual journey? Well, Job's example is more than a simple story of resilience in the face of adversity. It is a living lesson on the depth of trust in God, even when answers are not immediate and suffering seems interminable. The truth is that suffering is not just a test of faith, it is also an opportunity for the soul to be strengthened and spiritually matured. Every moment of pain is a chance to affirm, like Job, that our trust in God does not depend on favorable circumstances, but on a faith that remains firm even in the midst of the storm. Still, Job's test is not just a matter of personal faith. The deeper and more crucial question the book of Job presents is, what truly happens when evil enters the scene? Suffering is not evil in itself, but often it becomes a stage where human character is forged and revealed. In moments of loss, suffering, and pain, the human heart has the opportunity to choose the path of faithfulness to God or the path of hopelessness. Job was not a hero for never questioning, but for remaining faithful even in the darkest moments. As we move through the story, we see the reaction of his friends who try to explain Job's suffering based on a system of divine rewards and punishments. But what they do not understand is that the struggle between good and evil is not merely a simple exchange of good and bad deeds. Job's suffering was not a punishment, it was a test of character. Job was not being punished, he was being purified. And this distinction is crucial to understanding the true purpose of human suffering. It is not just a test of obedience, but a process of purification and soul refinement. And finally, the true surprise and lesson of the book of Job comes not only from the fact that he persevered in faith, but from the fact that, in the end, he does not only receive back what he had lost, but is also blessed with a deeper relationship with God. Job, who began his journey with strong faith but a limited understanding of God, ends with a deeper knowledge and richer intimacy with the Creator. He does not only get his possessions back, but also gains a new understanding of the greatness and sovereignty of God. The mystery of the book of Job is therefore much more than a simple battle between good and evil. It is a vivid representation of the struggle that happens in each of us. The struggle to keep our faith, trust, and character intact in the face of life's adversities. The true victory is not in escaping suffering, but in overcoming it with a stronger heart and a deeper faith. Are you ready to understand more deeply how this struggle unfolds in your life? How can Job's faith be reflected in your personal journey? In the next topic, we will explore the effects of suffering and how it can be a catalyst For a more intimate relationship with God, in the vastness of human history, few moments are as decisive as the death of Jesus on the cross. Even knowing Satan's power, the Bible reveals that the enemy was defeated in a definitive and eternal way at that moment. What Jesus did when he sacrificed his life was not just an act of love, but a historical and cosmic action that forever transformed the battle against evil. When he died, he conquered sin, death, and decisively Satan. This victory marked the end of the empire of darkness. But have you ever stopped to think, if Satan was defeated on the cross, why do we still see so much evil in the world? To understand what really happened, we need to look at the profound meaning of the cross. When Jesus died there, he not only exposed the perversity of sin, but also dismantled the forces of evil. Scripture tells us that by his death, he disarmed the principalities and powers, triumphing over them on the cross. Colossians 2:15. In other words, Jesus took upon himself the power of Satan and through his resurrection showed that death and sin would no longer have dominion over those who believe in him. In both symbolic and spiritual terms, the cross was the great moment of victory. However, something curious happens. If Satan was defeated, why do we still see evil so evident in our society? The answer lies in understanding the timing of God's kingdom. Christ's victory does not mean the immediate elimination of evil. On the contrary, it brings the certainty that evil has already been overcome, but its complete eradication is yet to come. What we experience today between Christ's victory and the end times is an interval where Satan, still aware of his defeat, tries to resist by spreading evil and pain. However, his defeat is irreversible. This dynamic leads us to reflect on the nature of evil in the world. The fact that evil still exists is not a failure of God's plan. Rather, it is an opportunity for us as Christians to live according to the victory already won. The spiritual battle continues, but the victory is already secured. The Bible assures us that in the end times, Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire, where he will be completely defeated and unable to cause any more suffering. Revelation 20:10. What does this tell us about present suffering? Well, it reminds us that although evil still exists, it does not have the final word. The victory has already been secured by Christ, and one day all suffering and wickedness will be consumed in his final judgment. So how can we understand the presence of evil in the world? Jesus, by conquering death, inaugurated a new type of life, one that, although still subject to struggles and trials, is no longer governed by sin and death. This completely changes the way we view suffering, difficulties, and even temptations. By understanding that Christ's victory was total and definitive, we can face adversity with the certainty that it does not have the final power. We are more than conquerors, for Jesus has already won the victory for us. This in itself changes the way we live, move, and face life's challenges. Now, if Christ's victory is certain, how does this reality affect our daily lives? How can we live knowing that we are already in a position of victory? In the next section, we will explore how Christ's victory over evil affects our present, how it empowers us to live with power and authority, even amid adversity. You will be surprised by the implications of this truth for your life. Many people, when reflecting on the spiritual battles they face, wonder how much power Satan really has over our lives. There is a common belief that he is such a powerful being that he can act without restrictions, spreading evil and destruction wherever he goes. But the truth is quite different, and this becomes clear when we look at the scriptures, specifically the book of Job. In Job 1:12, for example, we see an intriguing dialogue between God and Satan. God, in his sovereignty, allows Satan to act, but always within the limits that he himself sets. This passage is one of the most powerful for understanding that despite all his malice, Satan does not possess unlimited power. Satan is, indeed, an extremely deceitful and crafty figure. He can tempt, seduce, manipulate, and even cause suffering. However, it is essential to understand that he can only act as far as God allows. This is both a great relief and at the same time a great challenge for us as Christians. When we face tribulations or difficult moments, we may fall into the temptation of believing we are at the mercy of invisible and relentless forces. But the biblical truth teaches us that no matter how real the presence of evil may be, God remains in complete control of everything. For example, if we look at the story of Job, we see that he was severely tested, losing everything he had, including his health and children. But this did not happen without God granting permission for Satan to act in a certain way. However, there was a clear limit to what Satan could do. God told Satan that he could touch everything Job had, except his life. Job 1:12. This episode teaches us that even when we face suffering, God has a reason and purpose for allowing certain situations to happen, and he always sets boundaries for the forces of evil. Now, what does this mean for us as Christians in our daily lives? First and foremost, it is important to understand that while we live in this world, we will constantly be challenged. Satan will seek ways to draw us away from truth, peace, and trust in God. He may use external situations, such as family, financial, or health problems, to destabilize us. Furthermore, he may sow doubts in our minds, causing us to question God's love and faithfulness. But what we need to constantly remember is that although Satan has some power to try to destroy us, he is limited by God's sovereignty. How can we live with this truth in mind? The first thing is to keep our eyes fixed on God, recognizing that even in the struggles, he is in control. In Ephesians 6:10-18, the Apostle Paul instructs us to be strong in the Lord and put on the full armor of God, to stand firm against the attacks of the enemy. The armor is not physical protection but spiritual: truth, righteousness, faith, the Word of God, and prayer. These are the means by which we can fight against Satan's attempts to bring us down. Still, many may ask, but if God allows Satan to act up to a certain point, why does he allow us to face such difficulties? This question can be hard to answer definitively, but we can find comfort in Paul's words in Romans 8:28, where he says that all things work together for good to those who love God. Even when situations seem unbearable, we can trust that amidst the chaos, God is working for our good, shaping us, strengthening us, and preparing us for something greater. It is also important to understand that when we feel attacked or lost, God does not leave us alone. He has already given us victory through Jesus Christ, who defeated Satan and the power of sin. When we look at the cross, we see that humanity's greatest enemy has already been defeated. However, the battle is not over, and Satan still tries to draw us away from the truth. But as Christians, we can resist the enemy, knowing that Christ's victory has already been won. The limitation of Satan is a vital lesson for our Christian life. Instead of fearing his tactics and manipulations, we can live with the confidence that he has no power over us unless God allows it. And even then, God always provides a way of escape, a means of resistance, and a purpose in everything we go through. This does not mean we will live without suffering or difficulty, but that God, in his wisdom, allows only what is necessary for our growth and transformation. Therefore, as we face moments of temptation or difficulty, we must firmly maintain our trust in God. He has not lost control. He is sovereign over all things. Satan may try to divert us from the path, but he cannot defeat us if we are anchored in the rock that is Christ. And what comes next may change how you face each daily struggle. How can we fight against these forces in our day-to-day lives? Have you ever stopped to reflect on the incredible and at the same time perplexing gift of free will? Imagine for a moment that you are in a vast field with no fences, no boundaries, where you can walk in any direction. This field represents the choices we make every day. God gave us this vast field of freedom, but with one condition that is both a blessing and a challenge: the freedom to choose between good and evil. But what if, in giving us this freedom, God also gave us the ability to choose evil? What does it mean, then, that God allows evil to exist, especially when we know that He is all-powerful and could have annihilated Satan from the very beginning? The mystery of free will presents us with a great dilemma, but it also offers us a key to better understand the character of God and His purpose for each of us. When God created humanity, He did not make us puppets whose movements are controlled by invisible strings. He gave us something much more precious, the ability to make our own decisions. And here is the crucial point: without this freedom, we would not be truly free. True freedom requires that we be able to choose between right and wrong. But have you ever wondered why God, being all-powerful, allows evil to manifest in the world? If He had destroyed Satan right after his rebellion, there would have been no room for humanity to exercise free will. The ability to choose would have been nullified, and our existence would become a sequence of predetermined events with no true freedom. However, freedom comes with a price: the possibility of choosing wrongly. This is where the mystery of evil enters the scene. If God allows evil to preserve our freedom of choice, then the question arises: could He have done differently? Could God have created a world where only good existed without the presence of evil? But by doing so, He would have removed the freedom of choice. By not interfering directly, God shows us something profound about His character. He does not desire forced love, programmed worship, or imposed obedience. He gave us the chance to choose, to grow through difficulties, and to experience true love, which can only arise when there is the freedom to choose the other side of the coin, evil. Free will, then, becomes the foundation on which God builds a genuine relationship with us. He wants us to love Him, to follow Him, but that choice must be ours. Without the option to err, there would be no true choice for good. This leads us to understand God's purpose for humanity. God did not create us to be puppets, but to be actively involved participants in an eternal plan, where love, trust, and faith are the fruits of freedom. When we choose good, we choose God's love. When we choose evil, we choose to distance ourselves from that relationship, but always with the freedom to return, as He is always ready to welcome us back. Still, the question persists: why does God allow evil to have a place in the world? The answer lies in the very nature of divine love. God does not want us to love Him out of obligation or fear, but by choice. He does not want us to follow Him because we are forced to, but because by choosing good, we choose true freedom, which only He can offer. However, the mystery does not end here. When it comes to the final judgment, everything will be revealed, and the choices we made, the choices between good and evil, will have their consequences. The final judgment is, in fact, the closing of this cycle of freedom and choice. But what will happen at that moment? How can we understand God's justice when we see so much suffering and evil in a world that He allowed to exist? Soon, we will explore how free will is directly connected to the final judgment, and how this final decision is one of the deepest manifestations of divine mercy and justice. The end of Satan, as revealed in the Scriptures, is one of the most powerful and consoling promises for all who believe in God. Amidst the chaos, temptations, and suffering that we still witness in the world, the Bible gives us assurance. Evil has an end. The book of Revelation, which describes the final events of human history, clearly speaks of Satan's total and irreversible defeat. He will be cast into the lake of fire, where there will be no more space for his influence, lies, and destruction. This is the resolution of the battle between good and evil, which may seem endless, but ultimately concludes with God's definitive victory. However, a question arises in light of all this. Why does God, knowing Satan's fate, still allow him to operate in the world? Why doesn't he act immediately to eradicate evil? This doubt, which may seem like a legitimate concern for those who observe the challenges and tragedies of our reality, leads us to reflect deeply on God's divine plan. In a way, the continued presence of Satan until the final judgment is not a mistake on God's part, nor a flaw in his sovereignty. On the contrary, it reveals an essential aspect of his nature: patience. By allowing evil to still operate in the world, God is allowing human beings to make truly free choices. He does not impose obedience or faith, but invites people to choose his grace and salvation. It's as if he is giving humanity a chance to repent, to understand the depth of his goodness, and to make the decision to follow the path of light. The battle against Satan is not just a cosmic spiritual war. It is, ultimately, a struggle that takes place within each of us. Until the end, God offers the opportunity for all hearts to be transformed, so that no one is condemned without first being warned. Therefore, God's patience is revealing. It is not indifference to suffering, but an expression of his mercy. Every day that evil still has some influence in the world is one more chance for someone to turn to him, so that grace may be extended. It is an opportunity for people to understand that evil is not an inevitable part of God's creation, but something that exists as a consequence of the freedom given to human beings, and that one day it will be completely eradicated forever. As we approach the end, when Satan will be finally defeated, the story becomes even clearer. Revelation describes a glorious future where there is no more suffering, death, or pain. God's peace will be fully established, and evil in all its forms will be eradicated. This is the final promise of the Bible, the complete and total defeat of Satan and God's ultimate victory over the forces of evil. The knowledge that evil will not prevail forever should bring us great comfort, because even in the midst of daily struggles, we can be sure that the final victory has already been secured by Christ. But the big question that remains is, how does this directly involve us? How do the defeat of Satan and the final judgment apply to our lives now? The answer lies in how we live while waiting for that great day. If we know that God's victory is certain, then we must live in a way that reflects this confidence. Every choice we make, every action we take, is a way to declare that we are aligned with the divine plan. We cannot passively wait for this glorious ending. We must be active in our faith, living the truth of the gospel in a practical and visible way to the world. God's victory, which will be fully revealed in the final judgment, begins now, in our hearts and actions. The wait for Satan's end should not just be a theoretical reflection, but something that directly impacts how we live. And as we recognize this truth, we are called to spread the light of Christ in the world, living with hope, confident that in the end, evil will not prevail. Satan's story may seem long and full of pain, but God's story is one of victory, which will never be thwarted. And the great question that awaits us at the end of it all is, how can we live in a way that our lives reflect trust in God's final victory? Stay with us to understand how this calls us to real action in the present and how we can truly be part of this great victory of God. The final victory of God is a concept that deeply echoes throughout the Scriptures, touching every fiber of the Christian's heart. It is a promise that transcends time and space, offering us hope amid tribulations and revealing the greatness of God's plan for the future of humanity and creation. It is not merely a victory over Satan, as many may think, but over the entire cosmic order. Evil, which has wreaked havoc since the fall in Eden, will be finally defeated, not through a battle of temporal forces, but by a sovereign action of God that will restore all things. Imagine for a moment the chaos we see in our world. Wars, diseases, injustices, immense suffering that seems never-ending. It is often easy to wonder where God is in all of this. But it is here that the promise of the final victory becomes so powerful. God, in his infinite wisdom, will not allow evil to have the final word. The victory will not be a simple act of eliminating the forces of evil, but a new beginning for everything that has been corrupted. The future of creation is bound to this great event, where everything will be restored to its original perfection. In the letter of John, we see the clear promise of a new heaven and a new earth. This is not a vague idea or an esoteric metaphor, but a real and tangible transformation of our world. The scriptures speak of a time when there will be no more pain, no more tears, no more death, no more suffering. This promise assures us that God's final victory is far more comprehensive than simply eradicating evil. It is about the entire creation being restored to its perfect condition. When God speaks of a new heaven and a new earth, he is saying that his creation will be completely renewed. What is broken will be fixed, what is lost will be found, and what is corrupted will be purified. Now let us reflect on the impact of this promise in our daily lives. When we face difficulties, struggles, and pain, the natural tendency is to focus on the immediate crisis and present suffering. However, the vision of the final victory invites us to lift our eyes, to look beyond the temporary pain, and to realize that suffering is not the end of the story. The hardships we experience are not a sign of defeat, but a reminder of the future promise of a world without pain. When we understand that, no matter how intense today's tribulations are, they are temporary, and that God's final victory is near, our perspective changes. We are no longer enslaved by hopelessness, but we take courage, knowing that the final victory is already guaranteed. This is where the power of this promise comes into our daily lives. God's final victory gives us a new way to face problems. When we encounter challenges, we can remember that God is in control, that his victory has already been decreed, and that ultimately all things will be resolved in his sovereignty. This does not mean we should ignore suffering or challenges, but that we can face them with the confidence that they are temporary, and that the future God has prepared for us is eternal and without end. This triumph of God brings with it a new creation, and with it a new way of living. Christians are called to live with a different perspective, to live as citizens of the new heaven and the new earth, even while still inhabiting the old world. This translates into a life of hope and trust. Difficulties may be intense, but they do not define us. God's final victory is the true definition of who we are and what awaits us. Imagine a world where there is no more violence, where there is no more injustice, where pain and suffering are no longer part of the human experience. This is what God promises for those who belong to him, and the promise of a new heaven and a new earth is the guarantee that this perfect world will come. And most importantly, God's triumph will also be our triumph. When he restores all things, we, the believers, will be part of this new creation, living in fullness, free from all the shackles of sin and death. It is crucial to understand that God's final victory is not a distant promise that should be ignored until the end of our lives. It is not something found only in prophetic texts or apocalyptic visions, but a present reality that invites us to live with hope and faith right now. The struggles of today, no matter how intense, are a transitional part of the journey to this great victory that is yet to come. When we surrender to the trust that God will restore all things, our faith is strengthened and our view of life is transformed. In the end, what awaits us is beyond our wildest imagination. God is preparing a future where there will be no more tears, no more pain, no more anguish, and this final victory will reflect His justice, His goodness, and His boundless mercy. Everything we are living now, with its joys and challenges, will finally be completed in the fullness of God's work, and the new creation will be the manifestation of that perfection. But what can we do while we wait for this triumph? How can we prepare to live in this new reality that God promises us? Throughout this journey, many reflections have been made, challenges faced, and deep truths explored. Now the time has come to look at what truly sustains our walk: hope. After all, it is hope that transforms each day into an opportunity to live the victory of Christ, not as a distant concept, but as a tangible reality that shapes thoughts, attitudes, and choices. Imagine a soldier in the midst of a fierce battle. He knows that the war has already been decided. While the individual battles are intense, the final victory is guaranteed. This certainty changes everything. He fights with more courage, faces the enemy with determination, and does not allow fear to paralyze him. This is how we live with the victory of Christ. The cross and the resurrection are not just historical events. They are the foundation that sustains our faith and gives us hope, even in the darkest days. To apply this hope in our daily lives, we must first understand that it is active, not passive. This means that trusting in Christ is not just about waiting for the future with optimism, but living the present with purpose. Paul, in his letters, frequently urged Christians to persevere in faith and to run the race set before them. This call is for everyone. It is not just about resisting evil, but also about embracing good with all our strength. Consider, for example, the daily temptations. They come in many forms: discouragement, doubt, pride, fear. But hope is like a light that exposes the true nature of these traps. When we fix our eyes on Christ, we recognize that each temptation is an opportunity to show that we trust in His strength, not our own. It is in these moments that we realize that instead of fighting alone, we are strengthened by the Holy Spirit, who enables us to resist. But how do we cultivate this hope? One of the keys is nurturing a deep relationship with God. Just as a traveler needs a map and provisions to cross a desert, the Christian needs the Word and prayer to walk through a world full of challenges. Reading Scripture is not just a duty, it is a privilege to discover living promises that renew the soul. On every page, we find a God who is faithful, who does not abandon, and who constantly reminds us, "Do not fear, for I am with you." In addition, the Christian community plays an essential role. Living with the hope of Christ also means walking with others who share the same faith. When we share our struggles and victories, we are encouraged and strengthened. No one is called to fight alone. The Church, as the body of Christ, is a visible reminder that we are part of something greater. Together, we can endure difficulties and celebrate the hope that unites us. A story that well illustrates this power of hope is that of a young missionary who faced constant opposition in his mission. Persecuted and isolated, he could easily have given up, but his trust in the victory of Christ gave him the strength to continue. He used to say, "I do not look at the size of the battle, but at the greatness of my King." His hope was contagious and over the years transformed hearts, including many of his opponents. This story is a testimony of how hope is more than just enduring adversity. It is living with the certainty that God is working, even when we cannot see. Living with the victory of Christ is an invitation to embrace a life of courage, purpose, and gratitude. It means remembering that, despite the struggles, the story has already been written, and the ending is glorious. This is the hope that transcends circumstances, that drives us to keep going, and that transforms lives. And Now the final question remains. Are you ready to live this hope in your everyday life? Fix your eyes on Christ, for He is the author and finisher of your faith. May your life be a reflection of the victory He has won and a living testimony that in Christ, hope never disappoints. If you have been touched by this message, like this video and share it with someone who also needs to hear about this hope. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content that builds your faith and strengthens your walk. Together, we can spread this hope to more lives.